Dave Richardson had spent the better part of his savings on the above-ground pool last summer. It wasn't a decision he made lightly as a single father of two on a high school teacher's salary, but after 3 consecutive summers of record-breaking heat waves, the window AC units in their modest ranch-style home just weren't cutting it anymore. Living in Maple Ridge, a modest suburb with small, neatly parceled yards, meant he and his 2 kids, Mia, 10, and Tyler, 8, didn't have many options for summer cooling. The community pool was always overcrowded, and the 20-minute drive each way made spontaneous swims impossible on days when Dave had to grade papers or prepare lessons for his history classes. "We could always fill the bathtub with ice cubes," Tyler had joked one sweltering evening last May as they sat on the back porch with popsicles melting faster than they could eat them. That's when Dave decided to make it happen. He'd researched for weeks, comparing models, reading reviews, and calculating water and electric costs. He'd even taken on weekend tutoring gigs to save up the extra money. By early June, he'd settled on a 16-foot diameter Intex Ultra XTR, complete with a sand filter pump, ladder, ground cloth, and cover. Installation day had been a neighborhood event of sorts. His buddy Mark from the science department came over with his teenage sons, and Mrs. Guzman from across the street brought over a cooler of lemonade for the workers. Even old Mr. Peterson, who rarely left his house since his wife passed, hobbled over with his cane to offer advice nobody needed, but everyone politely accepted. The 16-foot diameter pool fit perfectly in the sunny corner of their backyard, leaving just enough room for Dave's small vegetable garden on the other side. He'd been careful to check local ordinances, making sure it was the appropriate distance from property lines and utility connections. He even reinforced the pool area with extra concrete pavers to ensure proper drainage away from both his and his neighbors' foundations. The first cannonball, ceremoniously performed by Tyler, while Mia documented it on Dave's phone, christened what promised to be their best summer yet. For 6 glorious weeks, the pool became the center of their universe. Mia invited friends from soccer practice, Tyler learned to hold his breath underwater for nearly a minute, and Dave found himself sleeping better after evening swims that washed away the stress of summer school sessions. The pool provided a much-needed respite during the scorching July heat, becoming a gathering spot for the kids' friends and a few fellow teachers Dave had grown close to over his 8 years at Jefferson High. He'd installed solar-powered string lights around the pool deck and bought floating LED lights that turned the water into a magical wonderland during their occasional night swims. What Dave hadn't anticipated was the attention it would draw from his next-door neighbor, Melissa Winters. She had moved into the neighborhood just 3 months before, replacing the friendly elderly couple who had lived there for decades. Dave had attempted to welcome her with a homemade lasagna, but she'd taken the dish with a tight smile and closed the door before he could introduce himself properly. The first sign of trouble came on a Wednesday afternoon when Dave noticed her standing at the edge of her property, arms crossed, watching as Mia and her friends giggled and splashed in the crystal blue water. The disapproving frown on Melissa's face sent an involuntary chill down Dave's spine, despite the 95-degree temperature that day. It took exactly 3 days for Melissa Winters to make her first official complaint. Dave had just finished grilling burgers for the kids when the doorbell rang. There she stood, perfectly coiffed in linen shorts and a polo shirt despite the sweltering heat, a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Melissa Winters," she said, as if they hadn't already exchanged awkward waves for months. "I wanted to discuss the noise level from your—" She paused, eyeing the backyard visible through his open sliding door swimming situation. Dave invited her in for iced tea, hoping to establish a neighborly rapport. Melissa declined the drink, but accepted the invitation to explain her concerns. The splashing was excessive, the children's laughter disruptive to her meditation practice, and the filtration system created a constant mechanical drone that kept her awake despite the pump automatically shutting off at 8 p.m. "I work from home as a pharmaceutical sales consultant," she explained with the air of someone naming a royal title. "Conference calls are my livelihood, and I can't have background noise." Dave, ever the diplomat after years of parent-teacher conferences, nodded sympathetically. "I completely understand. We'll be more mindful of the noise level." Over the next 2 weeks, Melissa, now firmly established throughout the neighborhood of her complaints about everything from mailbox positions to garbage can placement, began to fixate on Dave's pool with growing intensity. The Richardson children learned to speak in hushed tones while swimming, which Tyler said made it feel like swimming in a library. Dave installed soundproofing materials around the pump, positioning it on the opposite side of the yard from Melissa's house and placing it on rubber dampers to minimize vibration. He even established quiet hours after 7 p.m., limiting evening swims to gentle wading rather than the splash contests the kids loved. Each accommodation seemed to momentarily appease Melissa, who would acknowledge his efforts with a curt nod when their paths crossed while collecting mail. But just as Dave thought they'd reached an understanding, Melissa appeared at his door one Saturday morning clutching a yellow legal pad filled with notes. "I've been observing the position of your pool," she said without preamble, "and after careful measurement, I've determined that it encroaches on my property by approximately 3 inches on the northwest corner." Dave blinked in surprise. "That can't be right," he said, keeping his voice even. "I was extremely careful about the placement. We're well within the setback requirements." Melissa thrust the legal pad toward him. It contained dozens of measurements, arrows, and calculations that looked impressive, but made little practical sense. "I've documented everything," she continued. "The property line clearly runs through this section of your pool deck. I'll need you to move it immediately." Dave stared at the meticulous but nonsensical notes, realizing the conversation had shifted from noise concerns to something far more problematic. The property line had been clearly marked when he bought the house 5 years ago, and he'd been paranoid about respecting boundaries when installing the pool. "Let me review my survey documents," he offered, hoping to defuse the situation. "If there's any encroachment, I'll certainly address it." Melissa's thin smile didn't waver. "I expect this to be resolved by next weekend," she said, turning to leave. "Otherwise, I'll need to explore other options." As he watched her march back to her house, spine rigid and head held high, Dave knew he had a problem brewing that no amount of diplomatic skill could easily solve. The pool that had brought such joy to his family had become the focus of a neighbor with too much time and too little goodwill. As summer wound down, the evening air carried the first hints of autumn. Dave spent a weekend weatherproofing the pool for winter, carefully following the manufacturer's instructions, while Tyler and Mia helped by organizing the chemicals and cleaning supplies in the small storage shed. "Will Karen be mad that we're keeping the pool?" Mia asked, using the nickname the kids had privately adopted for Melissa after overhearing a neighbor use it. "It's our pool on our property," Dave assured her, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed his growing concern. On Monday morning, as Dave helped the kids into the car for school, he noticed a certified letter tucked into his mailbox. Inside was a 5-page document on expensive-looking stationery with Winter's residence embossed at the top. The letter claimed that not only did the pool encroach on Melissa's property, but it also violated multiple homeowners association regulations regarding aesthetic uniformity and structural additions. Dave stared at the letter in disbelief. Their neighborhood had no HOA. It was one of the main reasons he'd chosen this location, allowing him to grow his eclectic vegetable garden without interference. The letter demanded the removal of the pool by spring, citing bylaws that didn't exist and threatening legal action that had no basis. That evening, Dave contacted a professional surveyor. 2 days and $450 later, he had official documentation confirming what he already knew. His pool was entirely on his property with a comfortable margin to spare. He made 3 copies, one for his records, one to give to Melissa, and one to keep with the pool documentation. When he knocked on Melissa's door to share the survey results, no one answered, though he could see her silhouette move behind the blinds. He left the documents in her mailbox with a polite note suggesting they discuss any further concerns over coffee. The survey did nothing to deter Melissa. If anything, it seemed to fuel her determination. Throughout October and November, Dave documented her increasingly hostile behavior in a dedicated notebook. October 15, Melissa photographed the pool from various angles while Dave was at work. The security camera he'd installed after the property line accusation captured her leaning over his fence with a measuring tape. October 29, Dave found printed copies of municipal codes regarding semi-permanent structures placed in his mailbox. The highlighted sections didn't apply to above-ground pools, but rather to detached garages and sheds. November 7, Melissa reported Dave to the City Water Authority, claiming he was exceeding residential water usage limits. The inspection found no violations as the pool had been filled and properly maintained for months without needing significant additions of water. November 18, Dave's children came home visibly upset. Melissa had cornered them at the bus stop, telling them their father's pool was illegal and that officials would be coming to take it away. Tyler had nightmares that night about pool police in dark uniforms. After the bus stop incident, Dave requested a meeting with Melissa with a mediator present, his brother-in-law, a civil attorney who had offered pro bono advice. Melissa refused, instead sending a text message that read only, "My attorney will be in touch." No attorney ever contacted him. By December, as holiday lights began appearing on neighboring homes, Dave noticed a change in his children's behavior. Mia, once eager to play in the backyard even in cooler weather, now preferred to stay inside with the blinds drawn. Tyler no longer asked to invite friends over, fearing Melissa might confront them. Even with the pool wrapped for winter, their backyard had ceased to be the joyful haven Dave had worked so hard to create. January brought a heavy snowfall that blanketed the neighborhood in pristine white, temporarily masking the tension that had settled over the Richardson household. Dave found himself standing at the kitchen window one evening, staring at the covered pool barely visible beneath the snow, a mug of cooling coffee forgotten in his hand. The previous night, Mia had awakened from a nightmare, crying that the mean lady was trying to drain their pool with a giant straw. It took an hour to calm her down, and in the morning, she'd asked if she could have breakfast in the living room instead of the kitchen nook that overlooked the backyard. Tyler, meanwhile, had developed a new habit of checking all the windows to make sure the blinds were closed before settling in to build his Lego sets. "I don't want her watching us, Dad," he'd explain with a seriousness no 8-year-old should have to muster. Dave's colleague Sarah from the English department had listened to his troubles over lunch in the teacher's lounge. "It's completely legal to have that pool," she reminded him. "You've checked every regulation, had a survey done. You've done nothing wrong." "I know," Dave had sighed, "but this isn't just about being right anymore." That evening, as the kids did homework at the dining table, Dave made a pro and con list. The pool was completely legal, entirely on his property, confirmed by the $450 surveyor he'd hired, and had brought immense joy to his family last summer. But the stress of Melissa's campaign against it had created a shadow over their home that no legal documentation could dispel. He called his sister, Claire, for advice. "You know what Mom would say," Claire reminded him. "Sometimes you have to decide what hill you're willing to die on." "It's not just about me," Dave explained, keeping his voice low to avoid the kids overhearing. "Mia's having anxiety about going outside. Tyler no longer wants to invite friends over. Their home doesn't feel safe to them anymore." There was a long pause before Claire responded. "What's worth more to you, the pool or your peace of mind?" The question hung in the air long after they'd ended the call. Dave pulled out his laptop and began researching. By the time the kids were in bed, he had a plan. After much consideration, Dave decided to sell the pool to a family across town. The Morales family had 3 children and a large, flat backyard perfect for an above-ground pool. They were willing to handle disassembly and transportation themselves once the weather warmed up, and offered a fair price that would allow Dave to reclaim their backyard sanctuary in a different way. That weekend, he sat the children down in the living room. "I've been thinking about our backyard," he began carefully. "I know things have been tense with our neighbor." Mia nodded solemnly. "She doesn't like us very much." "It's not about liking or not liking," Dave explained. "Some people just have different ideas about how neighborhoods should be, but I want you both to feel happy and safe in our home." He laid out his vision, selling the pool and using the money to create a new backyard oasis. They would install a wooden deck with built-in benches, add a small splash pad that used less water and made less noise than the pool, and plant a privacy hedge along the fence line. "What do you think?" he asked, uncertain how they would react. Tyler looked thoughtful. "Will we still be able to get wet and cool off in summer?" "Absolutely," Dave assured him. "The splash pad will have jets and sprinklers, and bonus, no chemicals to maintain." Mia was quieter, considering. "Will this make the mean ladies stop watching our house?" Dave's heart ached at the question. "I hope it will help. And the privacy hedge will grow tall enough that she won't be able to see into our yard so easily." The children exchanged looks, having one of those silent sibling conversations that Dave could never quite decode. "I think it's a good idea," Mia finally said. "As long as we can still have fun outside." "That's my plan," Dave promised, "to make our backyard a place where we all feel happy again." As he tucked them in that night, Dave felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. The pool had been a dream, but not worth his children's sense of security. They would reclaim their home, one splash pad and privacy shrub at a time. The second Saturday in April dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for the pool disassembly. Dave had taken the day off from weekend tutoring, wanting to be present for both practical and emotional reasons. The Morales family had arranged for a small crew of workers, mainly relatives who had experience with pool installation, to help with the dismantling and loading. At 8:30 a.m., a pickup truck and a rented trailer pulled into Dave's driveway. Miguel Morales, a friendly man with salt and pepper hair and a firm handshake, introduced himself and his teenage sons, Marco and Luis. "We've been saving for a pool for 3 summers, he explained. "My wife couldn't believe our luck when we saw your online listing." Dave felt a pang of mixed emotions as he walked them through the backyard. "It's a great pool," he said, removing the weatherproof cover to reveal the empty basin. "Served us well last summer." "Why are you selling, if you don't mind me asking?" Miguel inquired, inspecting the frame. Dave hesitated, glancing involuntarily toward Melissa's house. "Just reprioritizing some things for the family." It hadn't occurred to Dave to inform Melissa about the pool removal. Why would he? It was his property, and the work would be done in a single day. The pool that had been the subject of countless complaints, threats, and harassment was finally being removed. Surely that would be cause for celebration, not concern. By 10 a.m., the disassembly was well underway. Dave had provided coffee and donuts for the workers, who efficiently drained the small amount of winter water that remained, removed the pump system, and began taking apart the metal frame. Tyler and Mia watched from the back patio, alternating between fascination with the deconstruction process and sadness at seeing their summer joy disassembled piece by piece. "Can we help?" Tyler asked, eager to be involved. "You can help carry some of the smaller parts to the trailer," Dave suggested, glad to see his son engaging with the outdoor space again without anxiety. As the children ferried pool noodles and smaller equipment to the driveway, Dave noticed a slight movement of the blinds at Melissa's window. A familiar chill ran up his spine, the sensation he'd come to associate with being watched. He hoped to complete most of the work before she noticed, avoiding any potential confrontation. By midday, the crew had made significant progress. The pool liner was being carefully folded to avoid damage, and the metal frame components were stacked neatly on the trailer. Dave was discussing the redesigned plans for the space with Miguel when a sharp voice cut through their conversation. "Excuse me, what exactly is going on here?" Dave turned to see Melissa emerging from her side door, striding purposefully across her immaculate lawn toward the property line. She wore pressed khaki pants and a blue blouse despite it being a weekend, her hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. Her face was flushed with what appeared to be anger, not exertion. The workers paused, tools in hand, looking between Dave and the approaching woman with confusion. Miguel raised an eyebrow questioningly at Dave, who sighed almost imperceptibly. "Continue working, please," Dave said quietly to Miguel and his sons. To Mia and Tyler, who had frozen like startled deer at the sound of Melissa's voice, he called, "Kids, why don't you go inside and get some lemonade ready for everyone?" Tyler looked relieved at the suggestion, but Mia hesitated. "Dad, do you need help?" she asked, her young face serious with concern. "I got this, sweetheart," Dave assured her with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Just some grown-up talk." As the children reluctantly headed inside, Dave took a deep breath and walked toward the property line where Melissa now stood, arms crossed and foot tapping impatiently on her perfect lawn. Her expression contained not the satisfaction he had expected, but something that looked remarkably like outrage.